We like to think we know ourselves. We glance in the mirror, we consider our preferences, our habits, our likes and dislikes, and we assume we have some coherent picture of who we are. But this assumption, the belief that we possess self-knowledge, is, more often than not, a comforting illusion. The reality is that much of what we call self-knowledge is filtered, distorted, and limited. It is filtered through the lens of social expectations, family conditioning, cultural narratives, and the subtle pressures of conformity. In other words, we know the version of ourselves that others have helped us construct. Think about it. From an early age, we are told how to behave, what to value, and even what to feel. Parents, teachers, peers, and society at large imprint upon us a framework of who we should be. Over time, we internalize these messages so thoroughly that they feel like innate truths. I am ambitious, we tell ourselves. I am caring. I am logical, or sensitive, or strong. But these statements are rarely pure reflections of our authentic selves. They are often a patchwork of expectations, approval-seeking, and survival strategies we learned long before we had the capacity to choose consciously. What complicates this further is that our minds are expert at self-deception. Cognitive biases, selective memory, and the human need for narrative coherence mean we constantly reinterpret our own experiences to fit a story that feels acceptable, even heroic, in our own eyes. We gloss over contradictions, rationalize failures, and elevate successes, creating an identity that is more about comfort than truth. This is why so many people feel a persistent emptiness or a quiet sense that something is off, even when everything on the surface appears fine. The self we think we know is, in fact, largely a carefully curated projection. To move beyond this illusion, we must begin by questioning everything we assume about ourselves, not in a nihilistic or destructive way, but with gentle, rigorous curiosity. Who am I when no one is watching? What drives me beneath the surface, beyond the masks I wear and the roles I play? Which of my desires are truly mine, and which are echoes of other people's voices? These questions are uncomfortable, because they require honesty about parts of ourselves that we may have neglected, denied, or actively suppressed. They challenge the neat narrative we've built around our life. Yet it is precisely in this discomfort that growth begins. By facing the gaps between the self we imagine and the self that actually exists, we gain clarity. We start to recognize automatic patterns, unconscious motivations, and hidden fears. And with recognition comes choice. We begin to inhabit our own life rather than reacting to the scripts written by others. This process is neither quick nor easy. It is a lifelong dialogue, a continuous excavation of layers, each revealing something new about the depth and complexity of our being. But each layer we uncover brings us closer to an authentic self, one that is not dictated by approval, comparison, or societal narratives. And in that authenticity lies not only freedom, but also a profound sense of peace, because we no longer live in the tension between who we are and who we think we should be. So, if there is one thing to take away, it is this. Believing you know yourself is the first obstacle to truly knowing yourself. Question your assumptions, explore your unconscious patterns, and embrace the discomfort of discovery. Only by confronting the illusion can you step into the reality of your own being. And in that reality, there is a clarity and power that no reflection or expectation can ever provide. Most of us carry within us a part of ourselves that we rarely acknowledge, a part that we hide even from ourselves. Carl Jung called it the shadow, and in contemporary psychology, we understand it as the unconscious patterns, impulses, and fears that quietly shape our thoughts, decisions, and relationships. The shadow is not inherently dark or evil. It is simply the repository of everything we have repressed, denied, or deemed unacceptable in ourselves. And yet, it wields enormous influence. If we fail to recognize it, it will continue to drive us in ways we cannot see, often sabotaging our intentions and our sense of self. Consider how often we act in ways that surprise even ourselves. We snap at a loved one over something trivial. We procrastinate on what matters most, or we feel inexplicably anxious or resentful. These reactions are not random. They are echoes of parts of ourselves that have been buried beneath social conditioning, shame, or fear. The shadow contains our unacknowledged anger, our unmet needs, our unfulfilled desires, and sometimes the qualities we most admire in others, but have forbidden ourselves to embrace. It is, in essence, the self that we have tried to edit out in order to survive socially, professionally, or emotionally. Most people resist exploring their shadow because it is uncomfortable. It asks us to look at the things we have been avoiding, our fears of inadequacy, our tendencies towards selfishness, or the moments when we have acted out of spite or envy. Yet avoiding these aspects does not make them disappear. In fact, repression intensifies their power. The unconscious operates through projection, meaning that the qualities we refuse to see in ourselves often appear in the world around us, in other people, as irritations, judgments, or conflicts. The person who triggers us most is often a mirror, reflecting a part of our shadow that we refuse to acknowledge. Engaging with the shadow is not about self-condemnation. It is about recognition and integration. It is about bringing the hidden, unexamined aspects of ourselves into the light of awareness so that they no longer unconsciously dictate our choices. This requires honesty, courage, and a willingness to sit with discomfort. It means acknowledging that we are not the tidy, consistent selves we present to the world. We are complex, contradictory, and sometimes messy, and that is precisely what makes us fully human. The process of integrating the shadow transforms not only how we see ourselves, but also how we relate to others. When we accept our own anger, vulnerability, or neediness, we are less likely to project shame or judgment onto those around us. We cultivate empathy because we recognize in others what we have denied in ourselves. We respond rather than react. We move from being puppets of unconscious patterns to becoming architects of conscious choice. This work is demanding, and it is lifelong. There is no final destination, only continual self-discovery and deepening awareness. But the rewards are profound. To embrace the shadow is to reclaim parts of ourselves that have been exiled. It is to move toward wholeness, where our actions, desires, and intentions are aligned with a self that is authentic rather than reactive. It is here, in the integration of the shadow, that freedom truly emerges. Not freedom from difficulty, but freedom to act with clarity, integrity, and purpose. So remember this: the parts of yourself you resist are not your enemies. They are your teachers. The shadows you deny are the very keys to understanding who you truly are. If you avoid them, they will continue to run your life from behind the scenes. If you face them, they will teach you, guide you, and ultimately liberate you. The invitation is simple but profound. Bring your hidden self into the light, and you will discover the depth, complexity, and authenticity that has always been waiting for you. We live in a culture that teaches us to distrust our emotions. From a young age, we are told to control them, to suppress anger, hide sadness, or dismiss fear as weakness. We learn to prioritize rationality and composure, to present ourselves as steady and unshakable, while our inner emotional life is relegated to the shadows. But the truth is, emotions are not obstacles. They are signals, maps, and messengers. They are not enemies to be defeated, but guides to be listened to with care and attention. Every emotion carries information about our inner state and about the environment we inhabit. Anxiety signals something is at risk or unresolved. Anger shows where boundaries have been crossed or where injustice persists. Sadness points to loss or unmet needs. Even joy and excitement are indicators of alignment with our values and desires. Yet most of us treat these signals as problems to fix, rather than data to interpret. We numb, distract, or rationalize, cutting ourselves off from a rich source of insight that could illuminate our own psychology. The problem is not the emotions themselves, but the avoidance of them. By ignoring or suppressing what we feel, we fail to understand the underlying patterns driving our behavior. For example, someone who reacts with disproportionate frustration to a minor inconvenience may be carrying unresolved anger from past experiences or unmet needs that they have never fully acknowledged. By dismissing the feeling in the moment, the message is lost and the behavior becomes automatic, unconscious, and often destructive. Only by attending to the emotion, exploring its source, and understanding its purpose can we transform it into wisdom rather than letting it govern us unconsciously. This requires a radical shift in how we relate to ourselves. Instead of asking, "Why am I feeling this way?" With judgment, we begin to ask, what is this emotion trying to show me? What truth about my life, my needs, or my patterns is being revealed? It is a practice of listening, deep, patient, non-judgmental listening. In doing so, we move from being reactive to reflective. We begin to notice recurring emotional patterns, hidden triggers, and the ways our past experiences unconsciously shape our present responses. And in that noticing lies the opportunity for choice. Emotion, when attended to consciously, also bridges the gap between intellect and intuition. Our thoughts can analyze, plan, and predict, but emotions provide immediacy. They tell us in real time what aligns or misaligns with our values and well-being. They are the body's language, speaking truth that the rational mind might overlook. To ignore this language is to live half awake, cut off from a source of guidance that is both intimate and profoundly informative. Ultimately, understanding emotions as messengers allows us to reclaim a vital aspect of self-knowledge. It deepens self-awareness, strengthens emotional intelligence, and transforms relationships. When we recognize our own feelings, we are less likely to project them onto others. When we respect the emotions of others, we engage with them authentically, not reactively. We learn that emotions are neither weaknesses nor inconveniences. They are invitations to understand ourselves more fully and to act with clarity. So, the challenge is clear. Stop treating emotions as something to hide or fix. Start listening to them. Start asking what they are telling you about your needs, your boundaries, and your patterns. If you do this consistently, your emotional life becomes a compass rather than a storm, a guide that leads you toward greater authenticity, understanding, and freedom. In the willingness to feel deeply and honestly, you will find not chaos, but clarity, not vulnerability, but power, not confusion, but profound self-knowledge. One of the most subtle and pervasive forces shaping who we think we are comes not from within, but from without. It is the mirror of society, family, peers, and culture, a reflection that tells us who we should be, how we should act, and what is acceptable to feel or desire. This social mirror is not inherently malicious. It is, in fact, necessary for human development. We are social beings, and from the moment we are born, our survival and growth depend on feedback from those around us. But what happens when we mistake that reflection for our true self? When the gaze of others becomes our compass, rather than our own inner awareness? From a very young age, we are trained to internalize judgment, approval, and disapproval. A smile, a frown, a word of praise, or criticism. These shape the way we see ourselves, often more profoundly than any inner reflection. We learn to edit our emotions, desires, and behaviors to match what others expect. Be polite, don't cry. You must succeed, or don't ask too much. These messages, repeated over years, become internalized directives. We begin to live not as autonomous beings, but as responsive reflections of those around us. And over time, the line between who we are and who others want us to be becomes increasingly blurred. The danger lies in unconscious identification with this external mirror. When we rely too heavily on social approval to define ourselves, our sense of identity becomes conditional. We feel worthy only when we meet certain standards, and we feel anxious, inadequate, or empty when we fall short. We may even pursue goals that are not truly ours, adopt values we do not resonate with, and suppress impulses that, if expressed, would reveal our authentic selves. In this way, the social mirror, while seemingly supportive, can subtly imprison us, keeping us from discovering the reality of who we are beneath the surface. Awareness of this influence is the first step toward freedom. It requires observing not only how others respond to us, but also how their responses have shaped our choices, fears, and self-concept. Who do we behave like, consciously or unconsciously, to gain approval? Which parts of ourselves have been muted to avoid judgment or rejection? And which desires, feelings, or talents have been hidden because they were deemed unacceptable by the gaze of others? Answering these questions is uncomfortable because it confronts the ways we have ceded autonomy to external forces. Yet it is precisely in this confrontation that liberation begins. Understanding the social mirror does not mean rejecting society or isolating oneself. Rather, It is about differentiating between the reflection of others and your own inner reality. It is about reclaiming the ability to evaluate, choose, and act according to your authentic values, rather than the expectations of those around you. When you recognize the subtle ways your sense of self has been co-opted by external feedback, you can begin to realign your life with what is truly meaningful, rather than what is merely acceptable or praised. This work also deepens empathy and connection. Ironically, by disentangling from the mirror of others, we can relate more genuinely to them. When we stop projecting the need for approval, we can listen without judgment, respond without defensiveness, and engage in relationships that are reciprocal rather than performative. We begin to see others not as extensions of our own anxieties or desires, but as complex individuals navigating their own mirrors. So, the key insight is this: the reflections you see in others are not your identity. They are invitations to awareness. Notice how you adapt to please, how you hide to avoid judgment, and how your choices may be unconsciously influenced. When you differentiate your true self from the social mirror, you step into authenticity. You no longer live by reflection, but by recognition of your own inner truth. And in that recognition lies freedom, the freedom to act intentionally, to feel honestly, and to exist fully as the person you were always meant to be. Truly knowing yourself requires a level of honesty that most of us are not prepared for. It is easy to talk about self-awareness in abstract terms, to nod along with the idea of introspection, but the practice of radical honesty is a different matter entirely. It asks us to confront the truths we would rather ignore, the contradictions, the flaws, the moments when we have failed, acted selfishly, or hurt someone we love. This honesty is painful because it strips away the comforting illusions we tell ourselves and others. It forces us to look squarely at the reality of our lives, without justification, without excuse. Many avoid this work because it threatens the identity they have built. We spend years constructing a version of ourselves that is acceptable, admired, or even revered. But these masks, careers, roles, achievements, personas, can obscure the real self. Radical honesty asks, who are you beneath all of this? What do you truly want? What have you been avoiding seeing in yourself? And in asking these questions, it often illuminates areas we have been hiding from even the most intimate parts of our consciousness. The paradox is that the pain of honesty is also its power. By acknowledging what we have denied, we reclaim control over the parts of ourselves that have unconsciously directed our lives. We stop being driven by shame, by fear, or by unconscious patterns. We recognize the ways we have been complicit in our own suffering, and, in doing so, we gain the agency to change. Radical honesty is not about self-criticism or self-punishment. It is about clarity. It is about seeing the unvarnished truth and responding with intentionality rather than reaction. This process also transforms our relationships. When we can be honest with ourselves, we are more capable of being honest with others. We stop projecting our fears, insecurities, and unmet needs onto those around us. We begin to communicate with clarity and authenticity, not out of manipulation, avoidance, or desire for approval. Others respond to our honesty with respect, trust, and reciprocity, and we learn that connection does not require compromise of self. It requires alignment with the truth of who we are. Radical honesty is not a single act, but a continuous practice. It requires vigilance, courage, and humility. There will always be moments when self-deception is easier, when denial offers temporary comfort, and when the fear of judgment tempts us to retreat. But each time we choose truth over illusion, we strengthen our capacity to live intentionally. We begin to inhabit ourselves fully, no longer fragmented by pretension, expectation, or fear. The most profound insight here is that honesty is liberating precisely because it is painful. Growth is never gentle. It demands that we face what we have avoided and take responsibility for the entirety of our being. Without this confrontation, self-knowledge remains superficial. With it, we move into a space of authenticity where our actions, values, and intentions are aligned. We stop living by reflection, by projection, or by fear. We start living by choice. So, take this with you. The truths you resist seeing are not obstacles. They are gateways. The discomfort of radical honesty is the price of freedom. When you allow yourself to face what you have hidden, to acknowledge what you have denied, and to speak what you know to be true within yourself, you step into a life of clarity, integrity, and power. In the courage to be completely honest with yourself, you find not only the depth of your own being, but the ability to live with purpose, freedom, and unwavering authenticity. All the work we've discussed so far, examining the illusion of self-knowledge, confronting the shadow, listening to emotions, discerning the social mirror, and practicing radical honesty, points to one ultimate destination: integration. True self-knowledge is not simply an intellectual exercise, nor is it a fleeting insight gained in a moment of reflection. It is the process of bringing together all the disparate parts of ourselves, of acknowledging and embracing our complexity, contradictions, and living in alignment with the whole of who we are. Integration is what transforms understanding into freedom. Integration begins with acceptance. We cannot unify what we deny. The parts of ourselves we have hidden, judged, or repressed, the shadow, the emotions we fear, the impulses we call unacceptable, must be recognized and held with compassionate awareness. This is not an invitation to indulgence or moral relativism. It is an invitation to see ourselves clearly, without distortion, and to accept the fullness of our experience. Only when we accept ourselves in totality can we begin to act from a place of authenticity rather than reaction. The power of integration lies in alignment. When our thoughts, feelings, desires, and actions are congruent, we experience a sense of coherence that is profoundly stabilizing. Decisions are no longer paralyzed by inner conflict or fear of judgment, because we have acknowledged and reconciled the internal tensions that once dictated our behavior unconsciously. We become fully present in our own lives, no longer fragmented by competing narratives or divided selves. Integration allows us to move through the world with clarity and purpose, guided by a self that is known and trusted, rather than one that is constructed to please, impress, or avoid discomfort. Integration also transforms our relationships. When we live from an integrated self, we engage with others authentically. We are less reactive, less defensive, less likely to project our unresolved conflicts onto those around us. At the same time, we are more empathetic because we recognize that everyone else is navigating their own complexities, their own shadows, their own mirrors of expectation. We relate not from performance or fear, but from presence, honesty, and understanding. Relationships become spaces of connection and growth rather than arenas of validation or control. But integration is not a final destination. It is a dynamic process, a lifelong practice. Life will continue to present challenges, disruptions, and uncertainties that reveal parts of ourselves we thought we had mastered. And that is the point. The work of knowing yourself is never done. Integration is not perfection. It is continual alignment, continual awareness, and continual choice. Each moment of reflection, each encounter with discomfort, and each honest engagement with our emotions and patterns is a step deeper into the wholeness of being. What emerges from this process is authentic freedom. Freedom not from responsibility, difficulty, or challenge, but freedom from the unconscious forces that once governed us. Freedom to act intentionally, guided by values and insight rather than fear or habit. Freedom to express our true self in the world without apology or pretense. Freedom to live a life that is ours, rather than a life dictated by external expectations or internal illusions. So, take this truth with you. The journey of self-knowledge culminates in integration, and integration is liberation. To know yourself fully is to embrace all aspects of yourself, light and shadow, strength and vulnerability, clarity and uncertainty, and to move through life with the coherence and courage that arise from that embrace. In this alignment, in this radical wholeness, you will find not only freedom, but a profound capacity to live deeply, authentically, and intentionally. It is here, in the integration of all that you are, that the promise of your life is fully realized.